And look, this is a high-tech entrepreneurship, so it's a risky business, and we understand that there's going to be some failure. But I think a lot of the companies that are on this chart and across the whole industry fail for really bad reasons. And we can do something about that. I'll get to that in a moment. But fundamentally, the lean startup is a vision for how our industry could be different. We don't have to accept the same level of failure that we've gotten used to if we change the way that we operate and if we're willing to give up on some of our really precious myths of entrepreneurship. So before we get any further, let's talk about what is a startup. Because one of the myths we're going to have to let go is what I call the startup dollhouse fallacy, that a startup is just a shrunken down big company. And it'd be nice if that was true, but it's not. That gives rise to thinking like, for example, big companies have departments, startups are companies, therefore startups should have departments, which is wrong. And we'll talk about why it's wrong in a minute. But I want to really emphasize this point, that startups are not like other kinds of undertakings that you may have heard about, read about, experienced. And because of that, my belief is that although my background is in consumer internet high-tech startups, the principles that I want to present to you today have a more broad applicability, that they work no matter what sector of the economy you're in. As I've been doing this Startup Lessons Learned thing the past year, I have gotten a chance to meet entrepreneurs in nonprofits, in enterprise, in government. 2 weeks ago, I was presenting these ideas at the Pentagon to the United States Army. And I wasn't sure whether they would really get that there's an opportunity for them to behave like startups, but they got it right away. Actually, I'm sad to say, a lot faster than a lot of supposedly savvy tech entrepreneurs. So the thing about startups is that they are human institutions designed to create something new under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And it's that uncertainty that really makes it difficult to transplant practices from other contexts into the startup domain. That's why we usually go wrong with a lot of these myths. And it's a human institution. I include that because we usually think about entrepreneurs as like two guys in a garage. You know, they're eating ramen noodles or something like that. But what makes you an entrepreneur is not the kind of noodles that you eat. It's the kind of business that you're trying to conduct. And so because our goal as entrepreneurs is to create a company, an institution that will outlive us, fundamentally entrepreneurship is a management science, which I think is counterintuitive to that kind of heroic mythology we have about entrepreneurs. So why do startups fail, and what makes them succeed? If you look at the real stories of entrepreneurs, as I know a number of you will get to do in this class, you'll discover a really interesting pattern. It's not that successful startup founders have better ideas than unsuccessful startup founders. Actually, and I say this as a startup founder myself, most founders have horrifically bad ideas at the start. What differentiates the successful startups from the unsuccessful startups is something we call the pivot. The idea is that as we test those ideas against reality, we discover a surprising truth, that within every bad idea is a kernel of a good idea waiting to come out. And so if you look at the stories of startups, right, they began as doing cyber cash for PDAs, and then they became the online payment provider for eBay. What? Right, they started out building basic interpreters, and then they had the world's largest operating system monopoly. And I know it's fashionable, and there's PR reasons to go back and say they knew all along that when they made that first basic interpreter, that was just step one, obviously, towards operating system world domination. But that's after-the-fact rationalization, which unfortunately we're very good at. And so I call it a pivot, because when tenacious founders discover that there's something wrong with their idea, they don't just give up and abandon the whole thing. Instead, they keep one foot firmly rooted in what they learned with the previous idea and move the other foot into the new direction. So it's not a complete change, it's simply changing direction, this kind of zigzag pattern that is what the paths of all successful startups look like. And the premise of the lean startup is actually simple. It's just if we can reduce the time it takes us to do those major iterations, those pivots, then we can increase the odds of finding product market fit and being successful before we run out of money. Does that make sense so far?